So, when the party of the Roaring Twenties came to a screeching halt, the entire world stood at a crossroads. A massive global crisis was forcing every single nation to pick a new direction. And today, we're going to look at how two of them, Germany and Japan, chose a path of absolute madness. And each did it in its own terrifyingly unique way. All right, let's get into it. The Great Depression, that was the trigger. And look, this wasn't just some market downturn. It was a complete, catastrophic collapse. It took all the anger and resentment that was just simmering under the surface and turned it into an absolute nightmare. In the middle of all that chaos, America chose Roosevelt and the New Deal. But Germany and Japan, they chose something much, much darker. And this is where you see the two roads fork. It's just fascinating. Over in Germany, you have what they called a legal coup, a vote from the bottom up specifically to tear down democracy itself. Meanwhile, in Japan, you've got a hijacking, where the government was essentially taken hostage by its own military, a government ruled by assassination. Two totally separate paths leading to the exact same terrible place. Okay, let's start with Germany and its so-called legal takeover. The guy at the center of this whole thing, well, he wasn't some brilliant general or a political genius, not at the start anyway. By just about every measure, he was a failed artist. You know, what's just wild about Hitler's early life is how unimpressive it was. He was a repeat failing student. You know, the kind of kid always stuck in the back row of class photos with the other bad students. His big dream was to be an artist, but he got rejected, not once, but twice by the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. He actually ended up homeless, living on the streets, painting postcards to survive, and just simmering with resentment. It was World War I that finally gave this drifter a sense of purpose. He became known as an insane soldier because he was so reckless, before finding himself jobless and bitter all over again. So while he was spying on different political parties for the military, he wanders into a beer hall and discovers his one true talent, public speaking. But he did so much more than that. He was a brilliant marketer. He personally designed the swastika flag. He put his followers, the brown shirts, in these sharp uniforms to look majestic and disciplined. He wasn't just building a party, he was building a brand. And here's the crucial part. Hitler didn't storm the capital with a tank. In 1932, the Nazi Party won the most seats in parliament, and he was legally invited, totally by the book, to become chancellor. And then, from the inside, he just dismantled the entire system. He used the Reichsstandfeier as the perfect excuse to blame his enemies and suspend everyone's civil rights. And then, the final step, he declared himself the Führer, the one and only person allowed to think for Germany. And just like that, the legal coup is complete. And the result? A complete rewiring of German society. His book, Mein Kampf, became a national bestseller. It was even given to every newly married couple as a wedding gift. Think about that. Kids as young as 10 were being trained as snipers, taught that their only mission in life was to produce qualified warriors. And all of this was happening while the regime began its horrific racial cleansing, targeting Jewish people for total exclusion from society. Now, let's pivot over to Japan, and you'll see a totally different picture. While Hitler was using the law to destroy the law, Japan's path was way, way bloodier. See, over there, the government didn't control the military. The military basically kidnapped the government. The engine driving this whole takeover was this terrifying military tradition called Gekokujo. It basically means the lower overcoming the upper. This wasn't just a saying, it was a philosophy that junior officers genuinely believed in. They thought it was their patriotic duty to disobey or even murder their superiors, including politicians, if they decided it was for the good of the country. In practice, this created something you can only really call an assassination bureaucracy. I mean, in the 1930s alone, 3 different prime ministers were assassinated by military factions who just didn't like their policies. Politics in Japan became a lethal game of survival. And this is where it gets just unbelievably chilling. After one group of officers murdered the prime minister, a huge part of the public rallied behind them. And how did they show it? They sent 200 severed fingers to the judge on the case, a horrifying, gruesome gesture to show they stood with the killers. The message this sent to every politician left standing was brutally simple, and man was it effective. The ultimatum was clear. You either fall in line with the military's plan for expansion, or you will be next. Civilian government was over. It just didn't know it yet. So you've got these two aggressive new powers starting to swallow their neighbors. Italy marching into Ethiopia, Japan pushing into China. And what did the rest of the world do? Well, the answer is almost as shocking as the aggression itself. They just watched. You see, Britain and France were operating on what's been called a wicked logic. They looked at Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union as these two giant evils. So they made a gamble. Their thinking was, hey, let's let Hitler get stronger. Maybe, just maybe, he'll turn his armies east and destroy the Soviets for us. It was literally a strategy of trying to shift the disaster onto someone else's doorstep. This whole policy hit its absolute peak at the Munich conference in 1938. To avoid going to war themselves, Britain and France just gave away a piece of a sovereign nation, Czechoslovakia, to Hitler. They sacrificed an entire country just for a promise of peace. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain flew home from that meeting waving a piece of paper that Hitler had signed, and he triumphantly told the world, "I have brought peace for our time." Of course, it was a joke. Within just a few months, Hitler broke his promise and swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia. So much for peace. But this whole policy of appeasement was about to backfire in the most spectacular, explosive way imaginable. The biggest diplomatic shock was still to come, and it would be the final trigger that pushed the world into war. Just look at how fast these dominoes fell. 1935, the West does nothing about Ethiopia. 1938, Czechoslovakia is sacrificed. And then, August 1939, the ultimate twist, the Nazi-Soviet Pact. Hitler and Stalin, two ideological enemies who absolutely despised each other. They get together, shake hands, and secretly agree to carve up Europe between them. The Appease's entire gamble had just blown up in their faces. So now, with his eastern border totally secure thanks to his deal with Stalin, Hitler was ready. On September 1st, 1939, while the world was in its deepest sleep, the so-called Wounded Tiger of Germany pounced on Poland. The 20-year truce was over. The Second World War had begun. So there you have it, a legal coup, born from popular anger, and a government hijacked by a fanatical military. Two completely different internal paths that led the world to the exact same global catastrophe. It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Just how fragile is any nation's path away from madness?